We want them to bleed on the training field, laugh on the battlefield. And obviously in season, whatever it is that athletes are faced with, we want them to be able to answer those questions with, I've been here before. Hey guys, this is Keir from Strength Coach Network. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the 4-step approach that I use to develop speed in field-based athletes. Now, at the heart of this is the idea of a complementary pair. A complementary pair is basically two opposing ideas that exist on the same spectrum. So for example, if we look at training for freshness and readiness, the minimization of fatigue, versus training for the generation of fatigue and long-term stimulation of adaptation, we can understand that both of these ideas have value, have merit, but we have to be careful about when we do what we do and why we do it. That's where the nuance of coaching comes in. Now, with regard to speed training, we have another complementary pair, which is the idea of development versus expression. The training that optimally develops a physical quality isn't necessarily that which teaches athletes how to optimally express that underlying quality. So I don't think you would get any argument from any strength coaches out there that would tell you that to optimally develop speed, athletes have to run very, very fast, at or close to top speed. They have to be fresh, they have to do it for moderate volumes, and they have to have complete rest periods between those efforts. Anything that strays from that, the likelihood that you're going to get optimal adaptation in terms of speed tends to go down. However, if we look at the demands of sport, and if we look at who are the fastest movers in field-based sports, it isn't necessarily the athletes that have the best top-line speed. We can see this with our eyes. We can see this in data from things like the NFL Combine, and then comparing that to subsequent career productivity and in-game metrics. So why is it that we're not seeing this optimal transfer from speed being developed in the environment that I discussed and the environment of sport? And of course, that's because the volume of sprinting being performed in a training session or a game is quite different to what we would see in an optimal training session. The density of those efforts, i.e. how much work do we have between sprints, is going to be different. It's certainly not going to be optimal or complete. The sensory and decision-making demands are going to be very, very different as well. When we add in that decision-making component, we see a lot of athletes who would be blazing fast on the track suddenly slow down their speed of movement in the field of play. And to steal a phrase from Buddy Morris, the body is only going to move at the speed that the brain is capable of making decisions. There's also an element of pacing in sport practice and competition. Athletes understand that they have to last for the duration of the game, and those athletes who are able to more intelligently pace themselves and not burn their energy will display higher movement speeds later in the game versus those athletes who might be blazing fast on the track but have poor pacing strategies and don't spend their energy wisely in how they solve sporting problems. And lastly, in sport, we have to understand that sprinting is going to be chained together with different movements. So getting up and down off the ground, cruising, jogging, and suddenly sprinting. We're adding in changes of direction and so on. And those athletes who are able to move more fluidly from one movement to another with maximum efficiency, they're going to appear comparatively much faster than those athletes who progress great straight line speed, but are extremely inefficient in getting into and out of those other movements. So how do we reconcile this conflicting complementary pair? Providing a training environment that teaches athletes to optimally express the speed qualities that they have, but also acknowledge the fact that the reason we have jobs as strength and conditioning coaches is that just practicing and competing is going to be insufficient for the development of speed as a physical quality. We have to do direct speed training in order to optimally perform on the field of play. And I think a great place to start for this is to work backwards from the end we have in mind that we're working towards in the first place. Namely, a worst case scenario in a game. We have to ask ourselves, if everything went wrong in a game, so the high end that we could expect of the number of sprints that athletes have to be able to perform, the high end of the duration of these sprints, the low end of the rest in between them, the low end of the rest between shifts or long breaks. It should be our goal as a team, as coaches, for athletes to experience that and taste that at least once during the preseason or the camp. We want them to bleed on the training field, laugh on the battlefield. And obviously in season, whatever it is that athletes are faced with, we want them to be able to answer those questions with, I've been here before. So we want to provide an experience for athletes to get used to the sensations, the pacing, and know that they're robust to that volume of work under a worst case scenario. So during the final phase, the month of camp, if you're in football, or the end stages of preseason if you work in soccer or rugby or any other professional sport like that, what I actually like to do is achieve that volume of worst case scenario work, but actually densify the efforts week by week by week. So for example, if we say that the worst case scenario for sprints in American football is going to be up tempo, we're having to perform a 5 to 6 second sprint every 30 seconds for 12 reps back to back. Maybe it is that a week prior to that, it's 60 seconds, and a week prior to that, it's 90 seconds, and a week prior to that is 120 seconds. So we can see that we're taking the same volume of work and cramming it into a smaller space of time, week by week by week, and intensifying the training in that way. Now, regardless of density, the likelihood is that the volume of sprint running that we're exposing athletes to in training camp, in preseason, is going to be a whole lot more than what we would consider to be an optimal developmental training load for field sport athletes. Most people would say that somewhere within the region of 200 to 300 meters of sprint running per session is going to be the sweet spot for developing speed in field sport athletes. Obviously, especially in football training camps, you can go way above that number. It's going to be crazy. It's not going to be very productive in terms of developing speed. Nonetheless, we have to meet the world as it is and understand that if there's a volume of work that our athletes have to be robust to, we need to get them up to that before camp starts, so that camp effectively is just business as usual, or even maybe a deload if we get lucky, rather than this sudden spike in demand that we typically see that results in so many non-contact injuries. So for 200 to 300 meters of sprint running, that might be anywhere in the region of 8 to 12 reps of sprints. If we contrast this to a typical game of football of 60 to 80 snaps, we can understand that clearly, even if they don't run full go every play, even if they're not playing every play, they're going to be doing a lot more than 10 reps in the context of a practice or a game. And we need to make them ready for that, regardless of what optimal looks like in terms of speed development. So for this reason, I like to spend 4 to 6 weeks going from what we consider to be optimal for speed development and ramping up the volume from anywhere from 15 to 20% per week until we hit that worst case scenario that we want our guys to be robust to going into camp. It's during this time that I also like to maintain full rest periods. So that would be 60 seconds of rest per 10 yards or 10 meters run, plus another 30 seconds just to be safe. It's going to also be during this time that I start to add in simple movements that we can chain together with sprinting. So getting up and down off the ground, simple decision making, changes of direction, so that we're starting to get athletes used to the movements that we're going to be asking them to perform in camp itself. If I have the resources, I would also like to steal from Eric Coram and get guys to add 10-pound weight vests to simulate pads, because that's another hidden intensification of training that I don't think we account for enough in football. The same quantity of work with an extra 10 pounds added on is not the same quantity of work. Now, as I said, optimal speed training is probably going to be anywhere from 200 to 300 meters of sprint running per session, 8 to 12 reps. And our job as strength coaches is to develop the underlying physical qualities. So for as much time as we have outside of ramping up that volume and densifying those efforts, I want to dedicate that training to optimal development of speed, either using those volume recommendations or using an auto-regulatory approach where athletes will keep performing sprints until they drop below 95% of their best speed for the day. Again, full rest periods, 60 seconds plus another 30 as a buffer, performed for 2 days a week. I like to perform my speed days at the extremes of the week, so typically Tuesday and Saturday, or Tuesday and Friday, with the third high day in the middle being dedicated to change of direction and grappling. Throughout this block, again, 4 to 6 weeks, I'm going to be using a short to long approach, because we can't just come out of the GPP phase and suddenly have guys doing gear changes and fly tens. So we start out with 5s, and we go to 10s, 15s, 20s, 25, 30s, 35, 40s. By that time, everyone is hitting top speed, and we can then adopt a split approach of 1 day for accelerations and 1 day for top speed and gear changes. Now, as I alluded to, high speed activities like accelerations, flies, gear changes, they're inherently risky. You have to train at max or close to max to develop max speed for the most part. And unfortunately, we have to earn the right to do this in terms of technique, work capacity, and tissue tolerance. So for this reason, we have to add a block on the front end of around 2 to 4 weeks of GPP style work. And to do this, I just like to do a straight steal from Charlie Francis. We run hills 2 or 3 times a week, walk back recoveries to add a metabolic component and reduce the speed of movement that they're capable of achieving. And obviously with the hill, we're reducing stress to the hamstrings, slowing things down and giving them a chance to think about the technique that we want to see in subsequent weeks and subsequent blocks. So now that we've worked all the way back to the start, if we use the example of football, in the month of April, we're going to be in this GPP phase, getting in shape and so on. For the month of May and maybe into early June, we're going to be doing the short to long approach where we're trying to optimally develop speed. We're sprinting 1 day for acceleration, 1 day for top speed when we get to it, complete rest periods, no additional movements being performed. For the second half of June and all of July, that's when we start to ramp up our volume and we start to chain together movements so that we're looking a little bit more like football and getting guys ready for camp. Again, the rest periods are complete rest periods and we're ramping up that volume 15 to 20% per week until we achieve the worst case scenario that we're looking to in camp. Now during camp, this is where we keep the volume consistent week to week. We're adding in those realistic sport movements, but what we're doing is we're densifying the efforts week by week down to a worst case scenario that we could expect to see in the season. Then of course, as we get into the season in September, we drop everything to a maintenance. Typically, the game is going to stimulate quite well the retention of acceleration, and what tends to not get hit in everyone but special teams is top end speed. So we actually are going to drip feed a couple of fly sprints in on, for us, it was Tuesdays, but you can do them whenever you want. And we're trying to maintain that through to the end of the season when the cycle starts over again. So that is just one example of how I try and reconcile the complementary pair of development and expression specific to speed for field sport athletes. If you would like more information on this topic, you can check out the presentation that I did on reverse engineering of sport demands inside Strength Coach Network. And if you have any thoughts or comments or requests for future videos on this channel, please drop a comment below. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thanks.